No one else is waiting to come in.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Brody Hilp, and I'm the president of the Ceremon Valley Democratic Club, which is sponsoring this meeting. We have many new people here tonight, and I want to thank you for coming and let you know who we are as a club. Our goal is to get Democrat leaders elected, and we also have expert speakers at our meetings and Democratic leaders. In June, we had Congressman Eric Swalwell. In July, we had Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. In August, we had State Senator Nancy Skinner. And on September 9th, we had 14 local candidates speak. And on September 24th, we had Professor Shermaninsky, who's the Dean of the UC Berkeley Law School, talking about Supreme Court decisions. And I put our website, srvdems.org, in chat. So you might want to take a look at it and maybe become a member. Also on our website, please click endorsements to see what candidates we've endorsed for the November election. We have thorough endorsement process, interviewing each candidate. Please vote for our endorsed candidates in races for BART director, our school district, and our city councils in Danville and San Ramon. You can also sign up for our emails, which tell you about rallies and how to get plugged in for the up and coming election. Email me to get on our mailing list. That's president@srvdems.org, and that's in chat. We have a guest speaker tonight, a Contra Costa County Supervisor, John Joya. He has another meeting tonight, but he can join us for a few minutes to speak about Measure X. It is a local Contra Costa County measure, and most of us don't know anything about it. Thank you, John Joya.
Thank you, Brody, and thanks for joining you, Democrats. I'm going back and forth with the wonder of technology. Our office is hosting with the Richmond Museum a virtual reception with video on the Block experience of North Richmond, one of the communities I represent. And so I'm taking a break from that to be here with you. And I appreciate the time to talk a little bit about Measure X. So I'll do it as quickly as possible. And if there's time for any questions, let me first say this would be the very first dedicated sales tax to county government that we have had. Other counties in the Bay Area like San Mateo, Santa Clara, Alameda, San Francisco, and actually others, but those are our neighboring ones, all have local dedicated sales taxes. We do not. Cities have them, as you know. Despite that, we've been very responsible in our budget and our finances. We have a AAA credit rating, which is the highest rating you can have in local government. However, our budget has continued to come under strain. A lot of our resources, revenue streams are federal and state. However, those are what we call categorical revenue, meaning the money we get from the federal or state government is used to run a program. As you know, we run health, social services, mental health, the criminal justice system, public works, libraries, and for example, we are the largest preschool provider in the county with our Head Start preschool program. That's federal and some state dollars that can only be spent on that program. We run welfare to work, foster care, elder abuse, food stamp, CalFresh. All of those come with very dedicated funding streams. We have a county hospital with 11 clinics. Nearly 200,000 people in our county get their health care through our Contra Costa Health Plan with our own county doctors and nurses. The county has been on the front lines responding to the pandemic. We've spent over $100 million since March. And so we started prior to the pandemic to look at a sustainable revenue stream to support our health, to support social services, the social safety net. And we put together a working group composed of community organizations and our own labor unions. And a needs assessment was conducted, and that needs assessment identified several key areas. One, it was emergency services and health, our hospital and clinic system. It identified our social safety net, which has come under additional stress, especially during this pandemic. It identified early education. As I say, we run preschools. It identified homeless and housing related to homelessness. And the result of that has been us placing a half-cent sales tax on the ballot this November that would raise in pre-pandemic times about $80 million a year. We would establish a resident oversight board, an oversight body, which would be community-based to make recommendations on the funding. We would account for this funding separately. Although it is general fund dollars, we have been really held to a high standard by the community, which is why actually we've gotten a pretty good broad support base. I can't think of many measures countywide that get the support of labor and business and community groups. And we're pleased to have the endorsement also of the Contra Costa Democratic Party. For example, Kaiser Hospital endorsed our measure and is making a sizable contribution. The East Bay Leadership Council, which is a business group, the Contra Costa Central Labor Council, which are labor unions, and many labor organizations, as well as many community groups who work on issues related to children, seniors, Multi-Faith Action Coalition, which is, of course, a faith-based network working to fight poverty, ensuring opportunity to end poverty in Contra Costa, Healthy and Active Before 5. These are all coalitions that work on social service issues who understand the importance of having a robust safety net. So that, in a nutshell, is our measure. I'm really here to answer any questions you may have. There you can get the needs assessment or the material about the measure on the website. And we have been working hard on a broad base. This is a different type of election, as you know. We did polling in March and in June. We did not want to put something on the ballot if there was not going to be an indication of voter support. I think during the pandemic, people have understood the importance of our health and social service system. Our support, even after negatives in our late June poll, showed over 60%, and this is a 50% measure. So with that, maybe I'll just open it up to questions.
Well, if we have any questions, people, please place them in chat.
Okay.
I thought you covered it really well.
Kamala Harris did a great job, and where can we pick up a Biden sign? Good. Yes, I did see much of the debate before coming on, although I have to say I thought they let Pence talk too long. He went over his allotted time, and they didn't cut him off.
Well, thank you, Supervisor Joya. Thank you for letting us know about that. And I would say we want to vote yes on Measure X. So thank you for being here and letting us know.
And I do see one of my former chief of staff who works for our county health department, who has just joined, and I know she's running for San Ramon City Council, Luz Gomez. So let me just do a shout out for her. She worked in my office for 10 years, and I can tell you is very smart, very committed, and would be a very great representative in the city of San Ramon. So
yes,
I'll just do a shout out to her since I see she's on.
She's one of our endorsed candidates. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again.
We try to get her to move to West County, but you know.
Well, thank you. We're gonna move on now. Okay. And let's see.
Do you need anything more from me, Bertie?
I don't think so, John. I think we're doing fine. I'm gonna we're running a little late. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Okay, you know, there's one ballot measure that's very important to us, and that's Proposition 15. Schools and communities first. I want to speak briefly on this Proposition 15 because our club has a story to tell. Back in July of 2013, our club had a speaker from a small nonprofit organization called Evolve. And that speaker from Evolve educated us about Prop 13, We had no idea that property tax benefits were also going to corporations. And corporations rarely sell their land, so their property taxes are rarely reassessed. And if they did sell their property, they had many attorneys who could find loopholes to keep their property taxes low. Just think, corporations have not been paying their fair share of taxes for 40 years. And that night we voted to endorse that idea of holding them accountable. That was in 2013, and our club has endorsed everything that's been happening since. Whenever they changed it, and they finally got it on the ballot as Proposition 15, schools and community first. So I want to turn the meeting over to our main speaker, Craig Cheslov. Craig is the past California Democratic Party's Region 2 chair, an area including our assembly district and 3 other assembly districts occurring in 9 counties. He is our extremely knowledgeable friend who knows all about campaigns and has been advising our Democratic clubs for years. His expertise even includes ballot measures, a few of which he has helped to write. So thank you, Craig, for researching all the propositions and agreeing to speak here tonight.
Thanks, Brody. Good evening, everyone. I'm now going to, we tried this out last night. I'm going to share my screen because we've written up some background information on each of the propositions. So Brody, am I sharing the right screen?
Yes, it looks good.
Excellent.
It's on 15, yes.
Excellent. How about that? It works. So what I've been asked, we're not going to do them in order because some of these are more controversial or more difficult than others. And we have some guest speakers on a couple of these, and we don't want to keep them waiting all night. But we're going to start here with Proposition 15, which Brody has described. It's an initiative constitutional amendment that was placed on the ballot to try to close that loophole that Brody mentioned with the tax break that commercial properties receive. So right now, as many of you who are homeowners in this area know, when you purchase a house, that sets the value for taxation, and then every year your tax base for that can increase by either 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. And this means over time that most homes are not being taxed for what their market value would be, and that's the same for commercial property. And the difference, as Brody explained, is commercial properties do not change ownership as often as residential properties, in part because corporations have very good accountants to make sure that they never have to trip the reassessment. So this is placed on the ballot to close this loophole and have corporations pay tax based on the market value of their property, and it would be phased in starting in 2022 or 2025, depending on the size of the business. It's estimated that this would raise $6.5 to $11 billion to be split between local governments, about 60%, and schools, 40%, although not all local governments are guaranteed increases in funding because that share of the money is dependent on the amount of new taxes paid by commercial properties in that community. You can see, I scroll a little bit, you can see who supports the measure. The California Democratic Party has endorsed this measure, along with several groups that I think are important to all of you. Governor Newsom, State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, 8 Democratic presidential candidates endorse this measure. It's opposed by the California Taxpayers Association, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the California Chamber of Commerce, and hopefully you can see here who has raised money for and against this measure. So that is the brief overview, and we can check to see if there were any questions or anything, Brody, you wanted me to cover in addition to that.
Are there any questions? Okay, we can move on.
Then we'll move on. So we're going to go to Prop 22 next. So let me scroll. Almost there. So Proposition 22 is the one that you've probably seen the most perhaps on TV about, because it's one of the most expensive ballot measures in history. And this is the one that would reclassify rideshare and delivery drivers, people in the gig economy, as independent contractors rather than employees. This proposition was placed on the ballot after the state legislature passed Assembly Bill 5, which you might see here from the additional background, codified into law a California Supreme Court decision that basically put into place a ABC test to decide whether somebody was an employee or an independent contractor. And that ABC test includes whether the worker performs their work free from control or direction from the business that hired them, whether the worker that performs the work is different from the business's usual course of business, and whether the worker is engaged as an independently established trade, occupation, or business. So if that test is what the court decided and then the legislature put in place to determine whether somebody is an employee or an independent contractor. Well, this would mean that under California law, that the Uber, Lyft drivers and DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub delivery people would be employees under that test, but the Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates, which are the main supporters and the main funders of this measure, want to keep them as independent contractors. And so this measure would exclude app-based rideshare and delivery drivers from AB 5 and its rules. It would then tweak some of the requirements, which you can see here in the description, about guaranteeing drivers 120% of the local minimum wage when they are actually driving, but not when they're waiting for rides or deliveries. It would require health insurance coverage, helping to pay with health insurance coverage for drivers that work 15 hours a week or more. It would also have some provisions to help pay with medical costs and replace lost income when a driver is injured or while driving. The measure would also require a 7/8 vote of both chambers of the legislature for any amendments to it. If it was determined that the amendment advanced what Proposition 22 tries to do, any changes that are not consistent with that would have to come back to the voters for approval. And this 7/8 process would include any future law, which might include laws that would allow a labor organization to represent and negotiate on behalf of drivers. So the supporters are the companies in the gig economy: Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, the California Chamber of Commerce, the California NAACP, Small Business Association, TechNet. You can see who has put in the money right now. It's raised over $186 million. The California Democratic Party is opposed to this measure, along with the California Labor Federation, the State Building Trades. Senator Harris and State Controller Betty Yee are also among those organizations that have come out in opposition to Proposition 22. So that's a very brief overview of a complicated and expensive measure that's currently on the ballot. So Brody, let me turn it back over to you to see if there were questions that have popped up.
We did have a comment wanting to ask you if you could enlarge the font. Is this on 100?
I will put it, let's try this. So the answer is yes. Is that better?
Yes, that's a lot
Excellent.
better. Thank you. Well, let's go to chat and see if there's any questions about this. Oh, I'm having a hard time seeing chat. I have to go up here to see chat. Craig, do you see chat?
I see the chat now. Yes, I pulled it up.
Oh, there we go. Yes.
So you can see the opposition website. You can learn more about what opponents say. Somebody has asked, why did drivers vote 4-1 to be independent? And based on my understanding, you have a few factors to that. One, as with many polls, how you ask the question has a large impact on how you get answers to that question. So I think when you look at that poll, you might look and see whether that wording is put the thumb on the scale. You also have drivers who are concerned. They like the flexibility of being able to sign in and just start whenever they want instead of having to sign up for hours in advance. And I think there's also, especially now, given the pandemic, given the situation with unemployment, I think there's also, I've seen some drivers express fear about losing a way to earn some income during a perilous time. I think that people on the no side would note that there's no reason why none of those things that those drivers are concerned about require them being independent contractors. AB5, the law in the state, can also protect the drivers if the companies would be willing to provide the benefits that employers in the state need to provide and the protections that employers should be providing. So that's the trade-off there.
Craig, we have Evan McLaughlin has some comments. Evan, would you like to speak your comments to everyone?
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the summary, Craig. That was really well done. I'll just answer a couple of the questions that I see in the chat to start off, but it can obviously answer others if they come up. People ask about why do drivers vote 4-1 to be independent? That is actually not a poll, like a reputable poll that you would see published in the newspaper. That was from a website. If you might have also seen, and if you use any of these apps, they are constantly feeding messages to customers, but also drivers in these apps. In fact, in Lyft and Uber, you can't actually start your shift until you read their propaganda and click confirm on it. So we're not sure how that that 4-to-1 ratio was obtained, but it's something that they clearly like to talk about. The truth is that this denies these workers, these drivers for Uber and Lyft, the Instacart shoppers, the Door Dashers, it denies them very basic minimum wages, basic employee rights, including a minimum wage, overtime if they work after 8 hours, healthcare, workers' compensation, social security contributions, even unemployment insurance contributions, so that they could get unemployment when they lose their job. It's unfathomable to me that people believe that there's a 4-to-1 ratio of people that want to do it. Another question you had is why is this opposed by the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party at its executive board meeting in July made the decision to oppose Prop 22, mainly because the people that are spending money, $180 million, which is the most money ever spent on a single ballot measure, by the way, are really just 5 companies who are trying to rewrite the law for themselves: Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. A lot of folks use these services, but what they're trying to do is they are trying to rewrite the law to deny the workers, the people that are driving you from here to there, going to the grocery store for you, picking up your dinner, deny them very basic employee rights, the minimum wage, paid sick time, paid sick leave, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. They're doing that in order to boost their own profits. California, especially the Democratic Party, is strongly in favor of a $15 minimum wage. We were the first state to pass paid sick leave for all private sector workers. We've had a strong safety net in place, and what Uber and Lyft and these other companies are trying to do is to deny that to these workers, and that is why they're opposed. There's some other issues related to the environment, related to equal rights, and I would be happy to answer any other questions you have while you invited me here tonight. And thank you for inviting me.
Evan, could you give your background? I didn't have your background.
Yeah, thank you. I'm the deputy campaign manager for the No on 22 campaign, and proud native of the I-680 corridor. Go Foothill Falcons. I have worked on this issue about workers in the gig economy for the better part of a decade, starting with just very basic workers' compensation rights that these workers did not have when Uber and Lyft started. They have fought tooth and nail every step of the way. Another thing that you may not remember, but Uber and Lyft did not allow you to actually tip the driver for the longest time until Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez ran legislation to require that these workers that aren't even making a minimum wage in many cases could accept a tip. And then when Dynamex came, I was involved in the legislation that came after that, as Craig mentioned, AB 5, in trying to ensure that what the state Supreme Court put down as a sort of one-size-fits-all test for all workers in California's economy, that it'd be more fairly adjudicated, but that in cases where there had been high instance of litigation because workers had grievances that they weren't receiving the benefits they were deserved, that there were exploitation in certain industries, that work was still upheld as being employment, so that those workers could enjoy the very basic safety net that we pride ourselves in providing workers throughout the state.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate you speaking on 22. Craig, should we move on to Proposition 23?
Sure thing. Thanks, Brody. So Proposition 23 is an initiative statute that was placed on the ballot after signatures were collected. It would create new state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics. Specifically, it would require each dialysis clinic to have a doctor on site during all treatment hours. It would require clinics to report infection information to the California Department of Public Health every 3 months. It would require a dialysis clinic to provide written notice to and receive approval from the Department of Public Health before closing or substantially reducing services. And it would prohibit any clinic from refusing care to any patient based on who is paying for the treatment. So whether it's a private healthcare provider or Medicaid, there are concerns about the clinics discriminating against people based on who is paying for them. This was put on the ballot by SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, which has been trying to unionize workers at dialysis clinics in the last few years, but has faced real anti-union activities from the largest players in the state, DaVita and Forensis. So you can see the supporters, SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, of course. Some dialysis patients have signed the official ballot statements. The money put into this is from SEIU. There are people who are opposed to it, including, as you can see, the dialysis clinics themselves have put in almost $86 million so far to fight this measure. And they don't believe that, they continue to argue that it would just add too many costs and do unnecessary things. So, of course, they are fighting it to not have to face those.
Okay, we have a speaker tonight on Proposition 23. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Dicus. Dr. Dicus is a practicing nephrologist, a kidney specialist. He gained his bachelor's at UC Davis, his MD at the University of Virginia, and did both his residency and nephrology fellowship at UC Irvine School of Medicine. He has been in private practice in Salinas, California for the last 18 years. His primary role is to manage the care of patients who require life-saving kidney dialysis. Thank you, Dr. Dicus, for being here.
Well, thank you very much for letting me join. Just a little bit of background. Right now, there's roughly 80,000, give or take a little bit, dialysis patients doing in-center dialysis in California. That comes to roughly 11.5 million dialysis treatments being done in the state of California every year. That's being performed mostly in 600, again, give or take a few, dialysis clinics. About 40% are owned by DaVita, 40% are owned by Fresenius, and the remaining 20% are actually owned by smaller companies, including multiple nonprofits and smaller organizations. We have one here in Monterey County that's actually owned by a small independent critical access hospital. What this measure does is, again, goes through 4 different parts. It requires a physician being present at all dialysis treatment hours. For most clinics, this is about 5:30 in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, including some clinics that actually have nocturnal or overnight dialysis. So most dialysis clinics have patients present for 80 to 90 hours a week. That creates its own set of problems, and I'll kind of get back to that. The next few parts of the proposition, including the infection reporting, the notification to the California Department of Public Health of any changes in services being provided, also the discrimination against payer source, are actually already being mandated and done. In terms of the infection reporting, every month we are required to report all dialysis and non-dialysis related infections to something called NHSN, the National Health and Safety Network, a federal database to which the state inspectors in the California Department of Public Health have free and unfettered access to. So that part's actually already being done. In terms of reporting to CDPH, whenever there's a change in status, whether we're adding services or taking off services, that actually already is required in law. So that part's already being done. The last part, in terms of discrimination against payer source, is actually already codified in something called the conditions for coverage. It's the Medicare Center for Medicare Services rule book by which all dialysis patients and clinics have to follow. And we're not allowed to discriminate against any payer source. They have to have some payer source. They can't be uninsured. But if it's a private insurance, Medicare, or Medi-Cal, we cannot discriminate against those patients based upon that insurance source. One of the local companies, local clinics owned by US Renal Care, was actually fined and placed on a watch list for 6 years for at least the appearance of discriminating against Medi-Cal patients. They're still on the watch list. So it is actually being done and enforced. So out of the 4 parts of this measure, 3 are already being done and enforced on a regular basis. For a lot of us, the big sticking part is having a physician present at all opening hours of each dialysis unit. So again, the clinics are open between 80 to 90 hours a week. We would need roughly either 2 to 3 physicians, realistically speaking, in order to cover that. Given that there's close to 600 dialysis clinics, we're talking needing somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 physicians to suddenly come up out of the blue to start sitting in these dialysis clinics and providing really no clinical care. All dialysis patients already have a supervising physician who round on the patient at a minimum once a month, and on average, actually once a week. So again, it really puts a huge strain on the entire medical population. We're talking about 1,800 physicians no longer being able to see patients in hospitals, 1,800 physicians no longer being able to prevent people from going on dialysis. 1,500 to 1,800 physicians no longer being able to help take care of patients with diabetes, but instead sitting in these dialysis clinics in a back corner doing nothing. On top of that, we would need to be able to pay these physicians. No one's going to want to sit in the back and not collect any income. So on average, when they look at this, we're talking about adding $200 to $300 million to the cost of providing dialysis care in the state of California, billed directly to the dialysis providers. You're not going to see that in the voter guide because it's not really passed on to the taxpayers, but it's a cost that's going to be borne by all the dialysis providers. Many dialysis clinics run very small profit margins or actually run at a deficit, especially in rural areas or inner city areas that have a high Medi-Cal population or a high uninsured population. those clinics would not be able to afford the cost of having these physicians employed. Again, 2 to 3 physicians just sitting in the back, not earning any income. And it would cause many clinics to actually become unprofitable, bankrupt, and run the risk of closing. Some of the estimates range between 150 to 250 clinics would not become financially viable and would close down. So for a lot of different reasons, we have a lot of problems with this proposition. And again, you can kind of guess where I'm going with this. It's a no vote for us in the nephrology community.
Yeah. Dr. Dykes, thank you so much for filling us in. Someone asked, is this increased healthcare cost to everyone? But as you said, I think you already answered that. It's to the small clinics, and then the small clinics would probably just go out of business and not be able to serve the people in the rural area. Am I right?
But that is correct. And then those people would have to get dialysis somewhere, because even one missed dialysis treatment increases the mortality by 30%. So they would be clogging up local hospitals. They would be going to other dialysis units that are already pretty much full. So again, it would increase healthcare costs by having people dialyzing the hospital, which again, just is much more expensive and less efficient.
Well, thank you so much for being here and filling us in.
No problem. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Craig for Proposition 24.
All right, Proposition 24, and I know we have a couple of speakers here to speak to this, so I will be brief. Proposition 24 is an initiative that was placed on the ballot after signature collection. It would modify the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which is a law dealing with online privacy and consumer data privacy. It would change some of those laws. It would create new privacy rights. It would remove the ability of businesses to fix violations before they were penalized for violating those rules. And it would create a new California Privacy Protection Agency to enforce the provisions of the law. One of the things the measure would do is that the legislature could only amend it if the provisions were to strengthen consumer privacy. The author of the Proposition 24 is worried that because the tech companies have so much funding, that it would be they would have access to legislators to try to weaken the measure going forward. So this would make it harder to do that by restricting the legislature's ability to make the changes that I think you're about to hear about as I turn it back over to Brody.
Okay. Our first speaker on Prop 24 is Jenny Bach. She was elected to serve as California Democratic Party Secretary in 2017. She currently is a young Democrat and works at a nonprofit to help build the bench for Asian American candidates. She is also a consultant who takes on various community projects, and she works for the Yes on 24 campaign. Jenny.
Thanks so much, Brody, and thank you for that description, Craig. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. My name is Jenny Bach, CDP Secretary, and I'm here to present for Yes on Prop 24. California has the opportunity to lead on the issue of privacy, making it the first state in our nation to have a privacy protection agency, as Craig mentioned, to hold corporate entities and big tech accountable, lessening the burden on the Department of Justice and our courts, who are currently only able to look at a handful of privacy cases a year. If passed, $10 million, which would be the floor, would be invested to solely focus on Californians and our children's data privacy. Unlike most ballot propositions, as mentioned, the California State Legislature would also be able to weigh in on expanding privacy laws with a simple majority vote. So this can give citizens privacy rights that will set the bar for the rest of the country. We have to do better to protect ourselves and our kids from being exploited when they're online. Prop 24 triples the fines for crimes against kids. The writers of Prop 24 worked with the California Labor Fed in drafting language to protect workers. That's why labor unions such as the firefighters, building trades, and AFSCME are in support. On questions of race, the initiative says that in the text of the measure that consumers have the right to stop companies from profiling them by race, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or union membership. That's why the California NAACP endorsed Prop 24. And the opposition has stated that Prop 24 would put a burden on consumers to opt out of the sale of their information. This is already in the existing law. Prop 24 would require businesses to honor a consumer setting, whether it's a global opt-out on our phones or browser or on an app, and would even compensate consumers if they wish to sell their information. The CDP e-board resolutions committee voted to support Prop 24. The e-board voted 57%, just shy of the required 60% threshold to pass, so they went neutral. Both CDP vice chairs and CDP controller are also in support, as well as the president of the California Young Democrats, Will Rodriguez Kennedy, State Controller Betty Yee, Congressman Ro Khanna, Senator Nancy Skinner, Assemblymember David Tu, former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, as well as others. Privacy is our fundamental right, and we should have stronger protections and expanded protections for ourselves and our kids. So I urge the San Ramon Valley Dems to support Prop 24 or stay consistent with the CDP on no consensus position. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We now have Jacob Snow, who's going to talk on Prop 24. He is a technology and civil liberties attorney at the ACLU of Northern California, where he works on a variety of issues, including consumer privacy, surveillance, and the preservation of free speech online. Jacob Snow, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. In my work at the ACLU of California, I've had a front row seat to and I've been in the trenches protecting consumer privacy rights in the legislature over the last few years. I've seen companies try to come into the legislature and weaken California privacy rights, and I've been a part of the fight against that, and we've stopped a lot of those. We've stopped all the efforts to undermine and gut the current law. And so I know what the fight for privacy and consumer rights is like in California, because I work on that and I fight for consumer privacy rights every day. Unfortunately, if you look at the details of Prop 24, it's a fake privacy law. It's 52 pages long. It's immensely complicated. I recommend that everyone read it, take a look at it, scroll through all 52 pages, and try to see if you can understand the language there. It's immensely complicated, but privacy doesn't have to be that complicated. Fundamentally, Prop 22 is going to help big companies that are hoping to avoid respecting people's rights. Fundamentally, right now, we need to think about how policy, and in particular, affects marginalized communities. We've all seen how harms from a global pandemic, from police violence, or even recently from the wildfires, fall disproportionately on people who are already struggling. And Prop 24 wasn't written with those people in mind, with the focus on people who have the time and the money to protect themselves. And that's really key. Prop 24 puts the burden on people to do the work and pay the fees to protect themselves. We have some of the provisions. And I'd like to talk about some of the things you haven't heard of, which are the ways in which Prop 24 undermines consumer privacy. Can y'all hear me? I just got a notice that my internet connection wasn't quite stable.
You were slipping in and out, but now we hear you.
Okay, great. But when you hear about being able to stop a company from sharing your information or stop a company from using your sensitive personal information, what you have to understand is this uses an opt-out framework. And so when you hear stop a company, that means go to a website, go to an app, fill out a form, hope a company complies with your request. There are 300 data brokers in the California Data Broker Registry. There are millions and millions of websites. All of us probably have a whole pile of apps on our phone. And so when 24 says you can stop companies from doing that, what it means is that you can go to every app, you can go to every website, you can go to all those 300 or 400 data brokers, you can fill out a form, and you can wait and see. And then you can see if the Attorney General will take action if your wishes aren't complied with. But there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to stop those companies from violating your privacy rights, because Prop 24 doesn't add a private right of action, just like the CCPA didn't add a private right of action. And so this is a law that the minor incremental steps forward are not enough, and the steps backward are really problematic. And overall, it's a step backward for privacy. There are new ways for the police to put a freeze on the deletion rights of people who go to political protests with no suspicion whatsoever. There's a provision that will allow companies to pull private data off people's devices when they leave the state. There's a provision depriving workers of privacy protections for another year. There's a weakening of the definition of biometric information so that certain companies that might be using facial recognition wouldn't qualify as biometric use under the new law. And there's an expansion of the definition of publicly available information that it would exempt companies like Clearview, which is collecting photos of people and selling identities to the police in this really way. And that's not even all of the ways in which Prop 24 weakens. We heard about devices, and unfortunately, Prop 24 weakens the CCPA when it comes to the device settings that you put in the browser or to your mobile phone or to something else. And that's and the way that works is that the CCPA actually requires that companies respect those device settings, but Prop 24 says that if companies have a do not sell link on their website, they don't have to respect all of the device settings or the settings in a browser that might opt out once and for all. So fundamentally, this is a law that doesn't take into account the worries and the concerns of vulnerable communities. People don't have time to fill out forms and do the work and pay the money to protect themselves. And when it comes to selling their own data, what this means is that the privacy of poor people is going to be violated and the privacy of wealthy people is going to be preserved, because who can afford not to sell their data for a few pennies or a few dollars? The people who can afford not to do that are the wealthy people. And so this is going to create privacy haves and privacy have-nots. And that's why we're in opposition and why I encourage you all to vote no as well. I'm happy to answer questions as well.
We have a question. Probably this is for you, Jake. Someone says right now, consumers or customers have to send a form to businesses to stop sharing their information. Will Prop 24 change this?
No, it won't. And in fact, it makes it worse because of the way in which the law deals with what we call the global opt-out, where it says that that if you have a device setting, it's not assured that if you say on your mobile phone, for example, that you don't want your information to be sold, companies don't necessarily have to comply with that. So sending those forms is going to become more common, not less, under Prop 24. And one other point about the agency, look, $10 million for an agency is just stack that up against the $1 trillion companies that are collecting and exploiting people's information. It's drastically underfunded. I worked at the Federal Trade Commission for 5 years. The Federal Trade Commission has a $300 million budget. $10 million is a drop in the bucket, and it's not going to make a difference as far as allowing enforcement.
Jenny Box, did you wanted to say your comment out loud? The Attorney General's office has said that they can't handle the full volume of privacy cases. A privacy protection agency with an investment of 10 million would help alleviate the stress of the AG.
Yes, and to add to that, $10 million is the floor, and approximately they plan to hire about 50 people. That's more than we have right now. And I think that it's safe to say that with an agency like that, fully prioritizing and focusing on our privacy, we'll have a watchdog that can actually process these fines and these issues when things are violated. Like when our kids are now going to school online virtually, you know, we don't want them to feel, we don't want our parents to feel, you know, unsafe of their kids browsing the internet. My colleague sent me an article the other day of these kids using unsecured Wi-Fi outside of a Taco Bell. What happens to them when companies are able to steal their data? So having a privacy protection agency would really help triple the fines for companies when they exploit our kids' data.
Okay. And Jake, could you, I really admire the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they have given some criticism about Prop 24. Can you go over what Electronic Frontier Foundation says, or would you like Craig to do that?
I'm happy to, but
Okay.
So the EFF is neutral, but they've written a blog post, which I really recommend that everyone read, that says that there are a huge number, there are a lot of real steps backward under the law. They talk about a huge missed opportunity in terms of preserving privacy protective defaults. Remember, this is something I've talked a lot about this evening, but privacy should be the default, not something that you have to go to a website, fill out a form, go to an app, send in a letter. That's not something you should have to do to get your privacy. You should get it by default. And that was a big concern for the EFF. They also talk about the erosion of the right to delete and the ability for that right to delete to be eliminated for these vague exceptions. They talk about the weakening of biometric privacy. They talk about mixing of data by service providers for purposes that haven't even been specified in the law yet. They also talk about the really weak enforcement because there's not a private right of action, and how without enforcement by people, you don't have the adequate amount of resources to fully enforce the law. I worked at the FTC in the San Francisco office of the Federal Trade Commission, and that had around 20 attorneys. And the idea that you could fully enforce a privacy law for 40 million Californians with something like that number of enforcement attorneys is just false. And so there needs to be a lot more people on the beat than there are, especially when you have a law here that is 24,000 words long, immensely complicated, and has sort of more aspects of it that are unclear than clear. And so you need to bring a lot of cases in order to clarify that. And an agency with $10 million just doesn't have the resources, and the AG doesn't have the resources as well. So there needs to be a lot more resources, and Prop 24 doesn't move the needle.
Thank you so much. Craig, it's back to you. Do you have anything that you want to add on Prop 24, or shall we move on?
I think that covered it really well. So
Okay.
Great. So now we are moving to Proposition 21, which is an effort to expand rent control in the state of California. So there's a 1995 law, the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, that prohibits rent control on properties that were first occupied after February 1st, 1995. This measure was placed on the ballot after an attempt to completely repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act failed in 2018. So this is a measure that would modify Costa-Hawkins to apply rent control to housing that's 15 years old or older since it's the first time it was occupied. The change would not include single-family homes owned by people who own 2 or fewer properties. Cities and counties would have to enact a rent control statute that would allow landlords to increase rent by up to 15% during the first 3 years of a renter's occupancy. It would also allow landlords a fair rate of return, which is consistent with court rulings here in the state. The Proposition 21, in addition to expanding rent control in order to protect it, as many of the ballot measures do, it would require a supermajority in the legislature to modify, and it would not allow any law going forward that would restrict or eliminate local cities and counties' right to establish residential rent control from taking effect. So this is an effort to increase rent control in the state. The California Democratic Party has endorsed the measure. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation backers are the ones who helped put this on the ballot. You can see some of the other organizations here, including the ACLU and the California Nurses Association, Housing California, several veterans organizations, the California Chamber of Commerce, the State Building Trades, and Governor Newsom have come out against. The fundraising so far is fairly equal in terms of total amount raised. And you can see those numbers here.
Do we have any questions on Prop 21? I don't think I see any.
All right. So now we're going to go to Proposition 19.
Okay.
And Proposition 19 is another act dealing with property taxes. It is this measure would create new property tax breaks for Californians aged 55 and older, people with severe disabilities, victims of natural disasters or hazardous waste contamination. It would close a different tax break for Californians that they receive on homes inherited from parents or grandparents. That tax break would be closed. It would require somebody to actually use that home as a primary residence in order to take advantage of that tax break. There are also provisions here that, one of the big ones is some of you have probably taken advantage of some laws that have happened in the past to allow you to move within a county, sell your residence, and keep your lower property tax assessment when you move. This would allow that to happen statewide. It's supported by the California Democratic Party, Governor Newsom, the realtors, the firefighters, Fiona Ma, Betty Yee, opposed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and some Republican members of the legislature. And Brody, I believe we have Sandra Lowe here to speak on this measure. So let me pause for now.
Sandra Lowe, could you introduce yourself?
I will. Thank you so much. I'm Sandra Lowe. I'm working for the Yes on 19 campaign. I'm also a member of the Democratic National Committee. And didn't Kamala do us proud tonight? I'm very excited to be talking to you on such a wonderful, exciting night. So my mom lives in Contra Costa County at Rossmore, and I get to visit with you guys off and on. So Proposition 19 was put on the ballot by the legislature. And so it had a lot of hearings. It was 2/3 and, very broadly supported. You had Supervisor Joya on earlier. He's a supporter. But one of the main backers of Proposition 19 are the California professional firefighters. And I'm talking to you tonight from Sonoma, California. So you know what we've been through this past month and over the years, and other parts of the state as well. So there's a portion of the money that will be saved by the state when these increases happen on the tax rates. The state will actually save some money, and that money will be put into the most underfunded fire districts in California, including CAL FIRE, which has been an absolute godsend to us up in the North Bay. And in Contra Costa County, you have a poster child for one of these fire districts, East Contra Costa. East Contra Costa Fire District is very underfunded, and yet it is a very prone to fire area, on the banks of the mountains there. So this would help that particular fire district. And then people who have lost their homes in the fire. I mean, I looked at the list today. There were, several hundred homes, I should say, in Sonoma and Napa counties that burned over the last couple weeks. And people who lose their home would be able to, without having an increase in their property tax base, move to a different home, perhaps in a different county. Right now, you have to stay in your own county, or you can go to a county that accepts portability. Your neighboring county, Alameda County, is already one of the counties that allows you to go there and transfer your property tax along with you. But up in the North Bay, there aren't any such counties. And I really feel for poor Butte County, where the Paradise Fire was and burnt 17,000 houses down. It's a really tiny county, and people were not even allowed to go to a neighboring county like Sutter, Yuba, etc., even Sacramento. So this will really help people out a lot, and it's getting broad support. I urge you to vote yes, and I'm here for any questions you might have.
I'm looking in chat. I don't think I see any questions. Okay, well, Sandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Brody. It's nice to see you.
All right, so now we will go to Proposition 14, which is a proposition that would allow the state to sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds to help fund the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Some of you may recall voting for a bond measure, Proposition 71 in 2004, which was put in the ballot in part in response to President George W. Bush's decision, which has since been reversed, to ban federal funding for embryonic stem cell research. Most of the money in that bond measure has been used at this point. They have about $30 million remaining for grants, according to the CIRM. So this is a measure to provide funding to continue that work. It would also dedicate $1.5 billion for research and therapy for brain-related concerns like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, epilepsy, other central nervous system. It would also increase focus on improving patient access to stem cell treatments, prioritizing projects that can utilize matching funds from other sources, and increasing public oversight and changing the membership of the board to help facilitate all of that. So that's what this would do. California Democratic Party is in support, along with the regents, the UC Regents, Michael J. Fox Foundation, and Governor Newsom. Right now, the opposition is California Right to Life Committee and a few people who helped sign the ballot statements. So with that, let me see if there were any questions.
I want to remind everyone to put their questions in chat. Chat's on the bottom of your screen. I don't think I see any, Craig. No question.
All right. Then we will move to Proposition 16. Proposition 16 would repeal Proposition 209, which many of you might remember is the measure that made California the first state to have a constitutional ban on affirmative action. This proposition would completely remove Proposition 209 from the state constitution, which would allow state and local governments and public universities to have more flexibility to enact affirmative action programs within the limits that are in place by federal and state equal protection laws. So this is a measure that simply would remove Proposition 209 from the state constitution.
And who are the supporters and?
Oh, the supporters, California Democratic Party is supporting this, the National Organization for Women, ACLU, Chamber of Commerce, Senator Harris, Governor Newsom, our local Congress members are also on the record in support. The opposition, Ward Connerly, who was the author of Proposition 209, the American Civil Rights Institute, Students for Fair Admissions, some former Republican members of Congress have come out in favor against.
I have a question here from Karen Beck. Karen, tell me if I'm wrong. Is this one for this proposition? You say, why does the board have to be increased to 35?
I think that's for the previous
One. Okay.
That's for the stem cell measure. That's one of the, as I understand it, that is one of the measures to help increase public oversight, to make the board more responsive to the public and the public's concerns. So that was one of the reasons the proponents put that into the measure.
Okay.
So back to any questions about Proposition 16.
Let's see if I'm reading chat. Yes, I don't see any for 16, so we can move on.
All right. So Proposition 17 was referred by the legislature to the ballot. The California State Constitution currently prohibits people in state or federal prisons or those who have been released and are on parole from registering to vote. This measure would change that. It would allow people who are on parole to register to vote. and that would affect about 50,000 people. That would allow California to join 19 other states that currently allow people to register to vote after they've completed their felony sentence, but are still on parole. The California Democratic Party is in favor of this, as is the ACLU, the Brennan Center for Justice, League of Women Voters of California, Senator Harris, Governor Newsom. The opponents include some organizations around crime victims and Republican state senator who have signed the ballot statements on this measure.
I'm not seeing any questions far. Okay.
All right. That moves us to Proposition 18. Proposition 18 is also a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. What Proposition 18 would do is it would allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 years old by the time of the general election to be allowed to vote in primary elections or special elections that precede that general election. So the thought behind this measure is that people who can, 18-year-olds who can vote at the general election should also have the opportunity to vote in the primary to help select the people who are going to be voting, who they can vote on in that general election. The California Constitution says you have to be 18 to vote in any election. The National Council of State Legislature notes that there are 18 states plus Washington, D.C. that allows 17-year-olds who are going to be 18 in time of the general election to be able to vote in a primary election. The California Democratic Party, California Young Democrats, Common Cause, Governor Newsom, Secretary of State Padilla have all come out in favor of this. The opposition comes from a lot of members of the Republican legislature voted, many Republican legislators, sorry about that, voted against putting this on the ballot. You see the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and the Election Integrity Project have also come out against it, this measure to allow 17-year-olds to vote in primaries. So I see a question. Who here was informed enough at 17 to vote intelligently? Was a question. I would say in my experience that a lot of 17-year-olds do a lot of work, especially when they know that they can vote at the age of 18. But that certainly, the opponents of this measure note that. They also note that in California, primaries aren't just about who's going to vote, who the candidates are going to be in the general election. You can also have tax measures and bonds at the state, at the local level on those ballots. So it's not necessarily just those general election campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Craig. I don't see any questions besides that one. Do we have any more? Have we completed them?
No, we have one more. We have Proposition 20.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay.
Proposition 20 is the last one that we're going to talk about tonight. So as a little bit of background, in recent years, California voters, the state legislature and California voters have passed some measures to reduce the prison population and reduce how strict we are about some nonviolent offenses. So Proposition 20 was placed on the ballot by people who want to roll those changes back. So this would make changes to AB 109. It would reverse parts of Proposition 47 and Proposition 57. So Proposition 20 has four major components. It would change state law to increase criminal penalties for some theft-related crimes. Specifically, it creates two new felonies related to organized retail theft around serial shoplifting and an extra one around how people organize to shoplift and steal from retail agencies. It would change how people released from state prison are supervised in the community, which is something that the voters changed to say that to add supervision, make that more stringent. It would make changes to the process created by Proposition 57, considering the release of inmates from prison. One of the things that happened there in Proposition 57, you have a base crime and then add-ons to the base crime. Proposition 57 allowed the parole process to take place when the base crime was completed. This measure would change that for certain crimes listed in the proposition. And this proposition would also require the collection of DNA from more crimes than the state of California currently does. Right now, this measure is supported by some members of the legislature, crime victim advocates. The California Democratic Party is opposed to it, as is former Governor Jerry Brown, who has put some money into opposing this measure because it would undo some of the reforms that he helped put into place when he was governor. Our county district attorney is opposed to this measure, as is the ACLU and other organizations who deal with crime victims.
Mhm. And also, our Contra Costa County District Attorney Dinah Becton is against this too.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Well, Craig, thank you so much for all your comments. Does that end all of our propositions?
According to my list, that is all of them.
That's wonderful.
And a couple people have asked about this document, and I think the plan is to put it on the website, hopefully in the next couple of days. Is that right, Brody?
Yes, we can do that. Yes. I'm glad to. Thank you, Craig, for doing that and allowing us to put it on our website. I just want to apologize to everyone who was here in the beginning. We were Zoom bombed, and I want to apologize for all the awful remarks in chat. I hope you didn't read them. Anyway, that we wanted to open it up so a lot of people could understand about the proposition. So I apologize. People have said this is a very helpful, and I really appreciate organizing and meeting us with tonight. Well, thank you for being here, everyone. And so that concludes our meeting, unless we have any questions, or I want to, be sure you sign up to get our emails and find out how you can help with the election. We need to do a lot of phone banking. I went to a Commit the Flip Blue meeting, and they said, stop writing postcards. We need to do phone banking and really connect with people. And then once we connect with them later on, follow up, get their email, follow up, and do relationship building to get and to remind them to vote. So please sign up for my emails. The email address is president@srvdems.org for our emails to see how you can get plugged in for the election. Also to see what kind of rallies are going on. We have some rallies going on in Black Hawk and a rally against Trump and pro Prop 15 down in San Francisco in the future. So please sign up for our emails.
And Brody, just to interrupt, we actually did forget one, as several people have noticed. We did. We forgot Proposition 25.
Oh, that's right, the last one.
The last one. So my apologies.
That's fine.
Checked it off and should not have. So thank you, those of you who noticed that. So Proposition 25 is a referendum on a law the legislature passed that, since a referendum collected enough signatures, has not gone into effect yet. So in 2018, a bill was passed to eliminate cash bail in California and create a risk assessment system to determine whether detained suspects should be granted pre-trial release and under what conditions. It would require a release for most misdemeanor crimes, and so this would have made California the first state in the nation to eliminate cash bail. So if you vote yes on Proposition 25, it will allow SB 10 to eliminate cash bail to go into effect. If you vote no, it will overturn the law. So the California Democratic Party is a yes on this measure, as is Governor Newsom, our local assembly member and state senator, our Contra Costa District Attorney is a supporter. The opponents, the bail agents, the Business Roundtable, and police, the peace officers of the police organization, and the NAACP state conference have also come out against.
That's so odd that the NAACP would be against that, but. Do we have any questions? I'm looking, I don't think I see any questions about this one. Thank you for reminding us to do Prop 25. That's an important one. I hope you enjoyed it and thank you all for being here. Are there any questions in general about our club or how to get involved? You can unmute yourself. Okay, well, thank you for being, and thank you so much, Craig, for all your hard work and all this research. It is wonderful to see it all. And so thank you again for being here, everyone. And we'll see you next time at our Democratic meeting. Thank you.